Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Buckle up. For the next 2 days, we're going to talk about education, K through 12 specifically, and how both Marxism and postmodernism have infiltrated your kids' school. So there's two things to discuss here, and like two paths to go on, if you will. So first, the Marxism. So tomorrow we're going to give very specific examples. We're going to go into the textbooks, specifically one called Rethinking Mathematics. And this book gives examples to teachers on how to infuse Marxist ideology and just the furthest crazy left policy and ideology that you could possibly imagine into math class. So it's one thing if you're going to do that in English class or history class or whatever, I think we get that, but how do you do it with math class? Well, one example is, let's calculate the percentage of presidents who owned slaves. Let's calculate a proper livable wage. Let's add up how much land the white man stole from Mexico. These are actual examples, I'm not making those up. So we'll go through that textbook tomorrow. So that's a Marxist infusion, right? Here are these Marxist ideology, Marxist policies that we're going to infuse into math instruction. That's one path. Then there's postmodernism. That is, what is math? What are numbers, really? James Lindsay said these people explicitly want to move away from the idea that there's one right answer in math. They want us all to accept that there's multiple ways of thinking and subjective answers to mathematical-ish questions, which usually involve feelings and stories and word games. In the Rethinking Math textbook, every lesson ends with having the kids write how that study made them feel. How it made them feel. A lot of feeling going on in woke math. Now, they didn't have to write an essay if they didn't want to. They could also make posters, because worship of the written word is a master's tool of the oppressor against the oppressed. So an essay is a form of white supremacy. So you don't even have to force kids to write how they feel. They can just make a poster about how they feel. If I was in school when this was going on, I would be the king of posters. I'd be so awesome at making posters, I wouldn't write a lick of anything. So we'll do more of that tomorrow. Does that make sense? You got Marxism on one path, and you got postmodernism on the other. Postmodernism is more like, think of it like just like New Age hooey, which is like, what is a plus sign really, right? That kind of thing. Today, though, I want to talk about where this all came from. Let's start with some fruit. So this is a man on the street interview with two young teachers. Take this one in.
So I was a 7th grade civics teacher, government teacher, and she is an elementary school teacher.
What year did we get our independence?
17 something.
We're teachers.
I actually don't teach what's in our curriculum. I'm teaching children social studies that's not in our curriculum, teaching them things about how to be an anti-racist. I taught them about protesting. I taught them about Black Lives Matter. I taught them about Black Lives Matter.
Nice. Now, lest you think that that is a rogue dummy teacher who doesn't know what our founding was. This is a promotional video of PS 63 in New York City. This is a K through 5th grade school.
ESI Creates has been an amazing opportunity for our school to have time dedicated to come together to talk about how do we create anti-racist schools.
I see teaching as a very political act. When we are engaging with our students, whether it's on social justice issues or multicultural issues or culturally relevant teaching, I see that as foundational to all learning.
We are learning a lot about like different issues in this world and like what's happening around. Like we're mostly thinking about like racial and culture in my class and how we could change the future.
We have all of these different people that are activists. We have gay people, we have transgender people, and we have people that are taking action. And we're learning how to take action in social studies now.
We've seen our students become empowered. We've seen them see that even at the age of 4, that they can take an active role and be activists. And so it's through this work that we realize that education without this conversation isn't going to make a difference for our children.
At the age of 4? My kid's like 3 years, 8 months. I'm not gonna talk to Jack about the legacy of slavery the age of 4. Among other wacky things there. So why do teachers think like this? You heard someone say in the beginning there, teaching as a political act. That's a common phrase in the education world. Here's the very short of it. Where did all the 60s radicals go? They went to the classroom. They went to universities. Radicals took over every sector of the university system, including the education department, which teaches teachers. So we're seeing the fruit of that. We got the 60s radicals went into education. They took over the education departments, who then indoctrinated the teachers, who are now in charge again, who are making the teachers like the one we just saw a second ago, who doesn't know when America was founded. I'm surprised she didn't say 1619. And it's even affecting everything, including math class. Let me give you an example here. I really want to prove the point here that this is not like a couple rogue people who I found on the internet who are doing this. This is from the top down. This guy, Robert Berry, let me read the quote first. He wrote this on Twitter. To my mathematics educators, we teach more than mathematics. We must engage in anti-racist and trauma-informed education in our daily practices. He is a professor at UVA, and he is the former president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. Okay? He's the guy, the head of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, who's like, man, we got to engage in anti-racist and trauma-informed education. This has infiltrated everything now. Is that clear? This isn't like, oh, look at this weird teacher I found in Berkeley. This is everywhere. So where did it come from? There was a guy, his name was Paulo Freire. He's a Brazilian Marxist. I don't know why I said it with an Italian name. He read a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed in the 60s. He was completely ignored, just like Karl Marx, who we talked about yesterday, completely ignored in his lifetime. But in the 80s, people in academia picked him up. Pedagogy, by the way, that's the art of teaching, like how to teach. So another professor in the 80s, his name's Henri Guiraud, Henri perhaps, picked it up and made this mainstream in the 80s. 1985, he wrote his own book. He dedicated it to that Brazilian Marxist. And he said teaching needs to become more political. He started out as a pure Marxist, right? So let's bring, again, this Marxist ideology into everything. But then he became a full-on postmodernist, where science and reason don't even exist. They're not objectively true. And the idea that science gives us knowledge, that's just a power move by the oppressors to give more white people power and to force Western ways of thinking onto the oppressed. This is a common term you're going to hear, ways of thinking. I got an example of that coming up next in the next segment as well. So keep that in mind. Western ways of thinking or just ways of thinking. You'll hear that from postmodernists. And that 2 + 2 = 4, that's a Western way of thinking. Right, so postmodern, there's no such thing as truth. Everything's relative. There is no reason or logic or reality or math. Right, the math doesn't even exist. How influential are these people? So I want to look at citations. Right, so citations, it's the number of times that your work gets mentioned by other academics. The more citations, the greater the influence. So Jordan Peterson. We love Jordan Peterson. He has 13,000 citations, academic citations. Isaac Newton, 27,000. Albert Einstein, pretty smart guy, 131,000 citations. Charles Darwin, revered by the left, right? 184,000 citations, Charles Darwin, pretty good. Paulo Freire, 412,000 citations. I've never heard of the guy. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Have you ever heard of Paulo Freire, this Brazilian Marxist guy? Of course not. 412,000 citations. So the Marxist, who said that the primary goal of teaching is to bring radical left-wing politics into elementary school classrooms, has more citations than Albert Einstein and Charles Darwin combined. Okay? Now, what do we got going on today? This is Rochelle Gutierrez. Let me pull it up here. Miss Rochelle. This is just a beautiful work of art right here. Miss Rochelle. Check out her bio. So she teaches at the University of Illinois, Champaign, I think. So just the first sentence. Dr. Gutierrez's scholarship focuses on she's a teacher of teachers, right? She's in the education department. Focuses on issues of identity and power in mathematics education. It's all Marxist. paying particular attention to how race, class, and language affect teaching and learning. Okay, so that's all bad enough. Go to the very last line. Can you read that last line there? Can you throw it up one more time, guys? This last line, this is quite a doozy. She also builds upon indigenous principles and has argued for a new form of mathematics where humans are no long centered. Now, I don't know if that's a typo or not. With these people, you can't tell if something's a typo, right? So maybe no long centered is like some weird postmodern construction, whatever. And I say that because of the next sentence. This form of mathematics is referred to as living mathematics with an X. Can you see? Living mathematics. It's a different thing. So she's not, this woman, she's not only for bringing in radical Marxist ideas and policies, right? So like, let's use math to teach how the white man oppresses you and why we need to expand abortion access to women or something, whatever. But math itself isn't even objective. There's no such thing as truth. Math can't be used to solve problems. And to the point where we're gonna even get rid of the name mathematics and come up with a whole new name, mathematics. Now you'd think this would be self-defeating. This is one reason why your brain's like, Slater, what are you talking about? You'd think it'd be self-defeating because, well, it's just like Marx's life. Again, that's why we did spend so much time yesterday on his bio. Just like in Marx's life, it's rule or ruin. Every organization he joined, he either sought to rule it or ruin it. Better off both. In this case, they've done both. They've ruled it, right? In the teaching profession, they've ruled it, they've taken it over, and now they're ruining it. So they take over these math departments, and then they say there's no such thing as math. They literally rename it to mathematics. All right, I think I got one more clip here. We'll take a break, take a breather. This is from a curriculum. Guys, can you throw this one up here? It's called Queering Mathematical Content. I just want to read the first sentence here. This is a gem. Both add queers and, by the way, I always thought queer was like the worst thing you could say. And now like this is like a thing we're supposed to do. Both add queers and stir and mathematical inquiry. You see? Not inquiry, inquiry. Work within the prescribed mathematical context, whereas queering mathematical content rejects existing borders and offers an alternative reality. Alternative reality indeed. So the goal here is to make queer the norm, whatever queer even fully means to the postmodernists. Keep in mind, remember that video we always play of one of the Black Lives Matter founders saying that she's a trained Marxist and organizer? In that, I think the next sentence, she says 2 of the 3 Black Lives Matter founders are queer women. So to go back to the opening video that we played, this is why you have elementary school teachers. Again, not rogue teachers. This is getting more and more institutionalized every single day. Every single day. And tomorrow we're going to prove it with actual curricula, curriculums. And this is institutionalized from the top. I think it's going to be fast forward majorly because of COVID, right? Because with COVID, everything's up in the air, right? It's a game on, do whatever you want. Like there's no more structure to anything in any way. So I think they're just going to be like, let's just do it now. No one's paying attention. And the goal could not be more explicit. It is explicitly, clearly, there's no conspiracy theory here. The goal is to turn your kids into far left activists. You heard like that poor 8-year-old girl, like, oh, that we have transgender activists come into our classroom and it's so great. That's freaking child abuse. This is a proper brainwashing. And then you saw it with that teacher in the beginning. Teachers who don't even know what the founding of our country is. I've been saying this for years, but as much certainty as I can muster today, do not send your kids to public school. And don't think your private school's safe either. But do not send your kids to public school. And if you must, and there's no reason you must, but if you must demand to see the curriculum from every one of your kids' classes, even math. And if the teacher says no, just politely remind them that you pay their salary, they work for you. The LA Teachers Union said they're not going to go back to the classroom. Their class is closed for the fall at least. And then the Teachers Union says they're not going to go back to the classroom until there's more protections for COVID, which is fine, okay. Oh, and by the way, defund the police, Medicare for all, and end all charter schools in California. The reason they throw that one in there at the end, which is what they really want, is they don't want you to have any option to escape this. These people have incredible power over your kids. Don't let them have it. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to talk about what happens when we live in a world where nobody likes themselves. What does that look like? And what does that mean? Let's talk about how in this postmodern world, everything is based on feelings. Sort of touched on it in the last segment, right? So math class, now you're supposed to write about your feelings on this math lesson. My all-time favorite quote, it was on Ben Shapiro's podcast, and he had some progressive woman from Teen Vogue on. And I think they were talking about like the gender pay gap or something. And Ben Shapiro just rattled off a ton of facts. And I'll never forget this line. She said, I hear a lot of numbers, and I hear what you're saying, and that they are numbers, but I feel like, and then she went on, and I'll never forget that line. Like, that is postmodernism on display perfectly. So here's a perfect example of it from right now. Princeton University. Someone at Princeton, Ivy League school, of course, wrote an open letter with 48 demands. These demands were so absurd. I read it, I was like, oh, this is just some stupid fringe group, and I just ignored the whole thing. A couple days later, I read over 350 professors have signed it. That's about a third of all the professors at the university signed this ridiculous thing. So one of the professors of linguistics, he also teaches ancient Greek, he wrote a different letter articulating why these demands are not good. So here's just part of it. He says there's dozens of proposals that if implemented, it's Professor Katz, by the way, Joshua Katz, if implemented would lead to civil war on campus. And he wrote even further public confidence in how elite institutions of higher education operate. Some examples from the letter: reward the invisible work done by faculty of color with course relief and summer salary. Time's limit, guys. Let me take a quick break on invisible work, because I did some research on invisible work and what that is. So invisible work is this concept of, and I don't have all the scholarship in front of me to quote this to prove this is true, so let me summarize best I can. Black people have to spend so much time, mental energy and physical energy, operating in a white supremacist space that they don't get any credit for. So if a white professor and a black professor are both applying for tenure, they're not judged properly because the invisible work of navigating the difficulties of a white supremacist world are not taken into account for the black professor. So black professors need their work needs to be acknowledged, and then they get a benefit of the invisible work that they do around them. Does that make sense? Of course it doesn't, but at least their explanation of it makes sense. All right, so that's one. Reward the invisible work done by faculty of color. Faculty of color hired at the junior level should be guaranteed one additional semester of sabbatical. Okay, another timeout. So the reason with that is there's this thing called black power naps, okay? And the idea here is that the white man has stolen not only the lives and the land from black people because of slavery, but the time. Black people, white supremacists have stolen time from black people, and black exhaustion and sleep deprivation, which was a tool from the slave owner on the slave, has been inherited and passed down to black people today. I'm not kidding, this is the claim, all right? So because Josiah Henson escaped slavery for a month, traveling from Kentucky to Buffalo to New York to Canada to freedom with 2 kids on his back, 500 miles. That's a pretty exhausting journey. He inherited that through the bloodstream of black people. And now today, all black people are exhausted. So black people need more vacation time. These people are brilliant, right? You gotta give it to them. They're good, they're smart. So that's what that is. So junior staffers need an additional semester of sabbatical because of slavery. Okay. Let's leave aside who qualifies as of color, though that's not a trivial point. It boggles my mind that anyone would advocate giving people, extraordinarily privileged people already, let me point out, Princeton professors, extra perks for no reason other than their pigmentation. So John McWhorter is another linguistics professor, this time at Columbia University. He's a black man, and he's so against all this Black Lives Matter, white fragility nonsense. He wrote a nice tweet. He said, bravo, bravo. He says, since May, I've gotten almost an email a day from a professor who fears speaking out against the modern distortion of progressivism that would get them fired. Okay? So, the fallout from this. So you with me so far? 48 crazy demands, 350 Princeton professors sign on to it. One Princeton professor is like, I don't know if this is such a good idea. What's the fallout? The president of Princeton has condemned the letter. The administration is, quote, looking into it. This is the president of Princeton. While free speech permits students and faculty to make arguments that are bold, provocative, or even offensive, we all have an obligation to exercise that right responsibly. Joshua Katz has failed to do so. So free speech for me, never for thee. So let's listen to some of the criticisms of this, all right? So he's being condemned on campus by these professors. So here's one professor right here. Katz is taking his lead from Donald Trump. This is the chair of the arts department. Taking his lead from Donald Trump, and she urges the president of the university to use his power as president to condemn Katz's actions of reckless endangerment. Remember that word, endangerment. We'll get back to that. This is another professor. Members of the Black Justice League, it's a student group on campus, have already begun to see an uptick in death threats. We have seen all too clearly how such race baiting, disguised as free speech, can be deadly. I love that. Oh, it's so good. Okay, here. I guarantee you that the members of this group, the numbers of threats that they've received, I guarantee you the number of threats has increased from 0 to 0. But this is the tactic from the left, that all speech that they don't like endangers people. This is what they did to Tom Cotton. Remember when Tom Cotton wrote that New York Times editorial? All the staffers, the black staffers and all the allies in the New York Times newsroom, all the junior staffers, they all sent out the same tweet saying that this editorial endangers the lives of black staffers. And then a couple of them went even further and wrote, and all black people. It endangers them. Free speech for you, for conservatives, is deadly. It's deadly. It's got to be stopped. Only we, progressives, enlightened progressives, can have it. You can't have it because your speech is deadly. There it is. Can be deadly. Amazing. Here's another one. Katz, this is someone in the classic, another classics professor. Katz's flagrant racism makes our case for us. And so, in the words of the great American lyricist Method Man, we keep it moving. I used to want my kids to go to the college I went to. There's no prayer. No way do I want them to. You too can spend $50,000 a year to go to an Ivy League school where your classics professor thinks he's so cute by quoting 90s Wu-Tang Clan member Method Man. But here's the most blatant. This is why I bring this up. This is the chair of the African American Studies Department. Professor Katz, at times in the letter, seems to not regard people like me as essential features or persons of Princeton. That's the feeling I got from reading the letter. That's the feeling I got. Is that true? Is that what he did? Does he not regard you as an essential person of Princeton? Or is that just how you feel? And does this other Professor Katz, does he have to be responsible for the feelings that you have to everything? Is that his responsibility? That's the best academic argument that you can get at Princeton. It's how something makes me feel. I talk like that with my 3-year-old. My 2 and 3-year-old, we talk about our feelings and how things make you feel because they're a little too young to have actual academic conversations and arguments and logic and reason. Apparently, this professor too. This is the same professor, African American Studies. When the Black Justice League engaged in its student action, they experienced violent threats. So what that description minimally, so what the professor's letter does, minimally does is trigger all of those experiences. Amazing. So endangering their lives again, of course. And then a student in the classics department says, this is a reminder of the way the classics as a discipline is taught. His opinions are reflective of a wider, here's the line again, historical way of thinking in the discipline. There it is, way of thinking, Western way of thinking, historical way of thinking, white way of thinking, ways of thinking. There it is, you see it everywhere. This is your white supremacist way of thinking, which instead, because it's white supremacist, your way of thinking, logic, reason, reality, needs to be replaced with feeling. So what's the truth? This is John McWhorter, again, the linguistics professor from Columbia University.
I think anybody can think more complexly than that. But if you want to pretend that the past is never past and pretend you're Faulkner, okay. If you're going to reject the country on the basis of that, you don't like yourself. I honestly believe that if you're thinking they owned my people, they looked down on my people, and therefore all of what's happened since then and the 99% of the rest of the country other than that is irrelevant because they didn't like me. Well, it means you don't like you. I mean, frankly, a normal person brushes themselves off thinking about how Jefferson Davis would have felt about them, thinking about how Woodrow Wilson would have felt about them. You've got more going on than that. And if you're white and you've jumped on this bandwagon, you're trying to feel good about yourself.
You don't like yourself. True with Marx, too. Again, that's why we spent so much time talking about him yesterday. You didn't like him. That's what narcissists do. If you fall for this Black Lives victimization and this Marxism nonsense, how do we put it? I think yesterday I said, what a sad way to view the world. Oppressed, oppressor, and all that. But of course, Marx's ideology was picked up eventually because bitter, angry losers, which Marx was, bitter, angry losers find great appeal in blaming others for their problems. Even Professor Katz. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, our special last Friday was about cancel culture. And I have two of, I think, the best, worst, however you want to put it, examples of cancel culture. And they're both from yesterday. I love, by the way, how the people doing the canceling, they say it doesn't even exist. They're like, what do you conservatives talk? We're not trying to get anyone canceled. What are you talking about? Why are you so paranoid? That's not happening. Gary Gorels, he's first of all, before I even make a list of what institutions you think are most seeped in white supremacy. What are the most racist institutions you can think of? Make a list. The police, certainly. Right? AM talk radio, the first, very racist. NASCAR, lots of Confederate flags everywhere. And obviously the one at the top of the list goes without saying. I mean, we don't have to list this one because we all know that the most racist place in the country, if not world, is the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Clearly. And I know you overlooked that one because it's Slater, of course, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Gary Gorels was the senior curator of painting and sculpture at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art from 93 to 2000, and then again from 2008 until yesterday. One of the most prominent curators in the country, I guess. I don't know, I've never heard of the guy, but he got fired. At the meeting, Gorels is a Zoom meeting. At the meeting, Gorels said that the museum could not avoid collecting the work of white men, which would amount to, quote, reverse discrimination. Soon afterward, a group of former employees who have been advocating, which is key, who have been advocating for change at the museum, created a petition calling for his resignation, which had been signed by blah, 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 blah. So why did he get fired? because he said, listen, guys, we're eventually going to have white artists again. We can't avoid having white artists in the museum. And if we do, then that's reverse discrimination. Oh, it's got to go. And he caved. He left. He resigned. Why did he cave? The only reason why I can think why anyone would leave is that they're getting a huge payout to leave. And that's part of the terms. We'll give you this huge payout to go, and we'll give you $1 million too. So if you ever hear me apologize, well, first off, if I'm wrong, I'll issue an apology, and you'll know it's sincere. You will know it's sincere when it's sincere. If I ever issue a blowhardy, 3-page, tearful apology, and this will be the key word. There'll be a phrase like, my family and I are going to take some time to reflect and learn. Again, I know, get educated. We're going to take some time to get educated about my privilege and where I can do better. That's my blink twice, right? That's my blink twice that I'm only apologizing so that I can get my $1 million wrongful termination settlement before we go to court. Okay, that's what that is. That's not a real apology. Other than that, why are these people apologizing? Don't they see that the mob smells weakness and there's never forgiveness ever? Unless, of course, you're the governor of Virginia or the prime minister of Canada, where you can just repeatedly wear blackface until like a couple of years ago, in which case you're fine. But this guy says, hey, we got to have white artists one time again. He's got to go. Here's his apology. I want to offer my personal and sincere apology. Again, these are all like buzzwords. If I issue that, you know it's fake. Blah, blah, blah. I realized almost as soon as I used the term reverse discrimination that this is an offensive term and was an extremely poor choice of words. I'm very sorry at how upsetting these words were to many staff. So upsetting. Don't apologize for that. But let's just reflect for a second on the poetry of racial turmoil in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. The same thing, there's like these schools, these like small liberal arts schools in like Lily White, Oregon, that no one's ever heard of, where racism for some reason is like super rampant, right? Like the white supremacist hotbed of like Radcliffe or like whatever, like what's going on at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco? But that's it. That is the point. That's the problem. The longer this ideology stews and ferments and festers, the more absurd it gets. And that's what's happening in our schools right now as well, to go back to the first segment. By the way, do we have a picture? This is the picture that accompanied the article, one of the articles in like the art journal about this. This is the type of work of art that this genius is responsible for curating. I'd get him fired for putting that thing up. Modern art, what a joke. Okay, so that's one. We got another one. This is, and my point here, by the way, is that if you think this cancel culture, A, isn't real, or B, it's just like famous people, like Nick Cannon or whatever. It's just famous people in celebrities or whatever. No, you're liable. You're liable to get canceled yourself. There's no one's off limits. This is the dean of nursing at University of Massachusetts Lowell. She was fired, and she sent out this email. She sent out an email, and someone screen captured it and sent it out on Twitter and wrote an upsetting statement. Upsetting. It's all about feeling, right? An upsetting statement by the dean. It was uncalled for and shows the narrow-minded people in leadership positions. It's a sad day to be a nursing student at University of Massachusetts. And this is my favorite. She said, Dean, I forget her name, but Dean, whatever, your words will not be forgotten. They fired her. She said she wasn't given a chance to defend herself. She was condemned without trial. So here's her email. Now, I just want to, again, note, this is the kind of stuff that will get you fired today. This will get you fired. And, lose your insurance, your house, et cetera, right? All future job prospects as well. You're toxic for X number of time. Here's what she said. I'm writing to express my concern and condemnation of the recent and past acts of violence against people of color. Recent events recall a tragic history of racism and bias that continue to thrive in our country. I despair for our future as a nation if we do not stand up against violence against anyone. Black lives matter. But also, everyone's life matters. No one should have to live in fear that they'll be targeted for how they look or what they believe. My grandfather fled Russia at 15. He came to the country seeking freedom of religion. Many people still suffer because of their nonviolent religious beliefs. People with non-traditional gender preferences frequently suffer for their way of life. And people of color still experience disparities in access to and quality of healthcare. There's simply no excuse for divisiveness and acts of violence against anyone. We're nurses. We care for everyone, regardless of race, creed, color, religion, ethnicity, ability, or gender preference. The public trusts us. We should peacefully advocate for those who experience inequities and defend those who experience the consequences of prejudice. Stay well. I hear that. That's like that's like a super progressive person. She's making the case for the rights of non-traditional gender preferences. She's saying there's disparities and inequities. She's writing about prejudice. That's not like some racist conservative screed. Like that woman is in the progressive woke tribe. But because she wrote everyone's life matters, that's it. Now, what she's guilty of is she, in a clunky way, tried to navigate the intersectionality matrix, right? So she tried to go from Black Lives Matter to non-gender preferenced people's lives matter to like Black trans lives matter. Truly, right? She tried to do it, and she did it in like a little too clunky of a way, in a way that was like a little too close to all lives matter, and therefore your words will never be forgotten. So that's the level of like, if you're like, oh, I'm not racist, like I'm not gonna be canceled. Are you more racist than that? Because I'd argue everyone's more racist than that. There was nothing, there was zero there. That's what'll get you fired today? If that's what gets you fired, everyone is eligible to be canceled. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So today's show, we started off with Marxism and postmodernism thoroughly infiltrating the K through 12 schools. That I'm haunted by that video of that public school in New York City, K through 5th grade, celebrating this poor 8-year-old girl, talking about how wonderful it is that she has transgender activists come, and the teacher saying that we can have 4-year-old activists. What is going on? Followed up by a struggle session of a Princeton professor who dare speak against, even in the slightest way, a list of wild demands made upon the university. And then regular people, just 2 regular people getting canceled for the most ridiculous things ever. So what is this all about? Tomorrow we're gonna have someone on who can give us a good little history of philosophy here, specifically about Herbert Marcuse, who's a lot of this. But just put very, very simply, we don't have to get too academic about it right here. It's all about feeling. In postmodernism, there's no reality, there's no logic, there's no reason. Those are all master's tools of white supremacists. So we have to get rid of those. So what are you left with? You're only left with feeling and how you feel. That's it. And you heard it from the Princeton professor that's how it made me feel. Right? It's crazy. Colin Wright, we're gonna talk about him probably tomorrow. He's been canceled. He sent out a tweet. He was at Penn State and he was looking for a job or a professor job. And he sent out a tweet saying, maybe we shouldn't give puberty blockers to 10-year-olds. That's just like a thought. And that's like, how dare he? So there's this huge cancel campaign to get him culture. We'll tell the whole story tomorrow. But here's what he wrote. He said, critical social justice is so enticing to many because it quite literally stresses the idea that if you feel it, then it's true. But this is a breeding ground for false positives. Science, in contrast, stresses the exact opposite. The easiest person to fool is yourself. Richard Feynman is the man who said that back in the 50s. Let's keep going here. The skeptical approach in science does not eliminate false positives, but it does greatly mitigate them. This is what makes science more reliable, but it's also what makes it so frustrating. Learning, this is the key, learning to not just be okay with being wrong, but to actively seek to debunk yourself at every turn is a hard mentality to cultivate. This is not the default state for our minds. It must be painfully instilled against evolved psychological self-defense mechanisms. But the payoff, knowledge and progress, is well worth the struggle. Truth doesn't come easily. It often hurts. But as the saying goes, no pain, no gain. I really like this idea that the scientific method doesn't come easily. That's difficult. It hurts even. This scientific posture of coming up with a hypothesis and then coming up with a repeatable experiment to try and prove your hypothesis wrong. That's not the default of human nature. All we all want to do everywhere is prove ourselves right all the time. And we think we're right, we're morally superior to everyone, we're more right than everyone, we're just wonderful and genius and brilliant all the time. It is difficult. It is intellectually and emotionally difficult to have the humility to not only think that it may be wrong, but to prove yourself, to actively go out and prove yourself wrong, but that's real science. And that mentality has to be actively cultivated or else we lose it. And then we go back to what we've always been, which is what we're really seeing now with all this just Marxist, cultist groupthink. It's similar to the analogy we shared, was it Monday or last week about Florence, the Florence Cathedral. The very, very short of it, we missed it. I think the Florence Cathedral is the most beautiful building in the world. They started building it in 1296, and they didn't know how to build the dome. They forgot. They wanted to build this whole thing, and they drew it out, and they're like, well, how do we build the dome? I don't know. A dome like that hadn't been built for over 700 years. It's not like a dome's never been built. They just forgot how to do it. 700 years it's been, and they forgot. But they're like, we're just gonna start anyway, and maybe, hopefully, by the time we get to it, we'll start on this end, and by the time we get to it, maybe someone will know how to do it again. Isn't that crazy? And 81 years after they first started building it, the guy who figured it out was born. And then it took another 60 years from his birth to actually build it. But the idea that we as a people once knew how to build a dome and then forgot how to build a dome, this is wild to me. Because we're in this mindset where we know something, so we'll just know it forever. Well, no, not necessarily at all. It's the same thing here. We can be a people who once knew how to properly do science and then forget how to properly perform science. We could be a people who once knew how to live with liberty and then forget. We once knew how to have a federalist Republican system of government and then forget how to do it. These things are not human nature. If they were, they wouldn't be so rare and unique in human history. But today it's all about feeling. The entire progressive system is built on feelings. That's all that's left. You know, Barry Weiss, Barry Weiss, I've never heard her name pronounced. She resigned from the New York Times. She's like a centrist, liberal kind of person, but she couldn't take it at the New York Times anymore. And so she left and she wrote this great letter about it. And she said, the truth is that intellectual curiosity, let alone risk-taking, is now a liability at the Times. Why edit something that's challenging to our readings when we can assure ourselves of job security and clicks by publishing our 4,000th op-ed arguing that Donald Trump is a unique danger to the country and the world? So self-censorship has become the norm. And that's where we're in right now. That's what happens when anything you do, you can be canceled because how it makes other people feel. And that's all we're left with. No one's gonna do anything. No one's gonna say anything. And I'll end the show here with Garry Kasparov. He's the chess champion guy. He's talking about this Harper's letter. Remember the Harper's letter? We don't have time to go into it now, but it's basically people who sign it, we defend free speech. But in a very meta way, a lot of the people who signed it unsigned it because they didn't like some of the other people that signed it, and they didn't want to be associated with those people, whatever. Here's Garry Kasparov. He said, note that the signatories aren't the ones worried about being canceled. Most of us have reputations, platforms, and security. We are worried about the stifling of other new ideas and new voices due to fear, groupthink, and discrimination. In the USSR, it wasn't only the party censors who limited what writers wrote. It was every writer, knowing in advance what they could and could not say, and what would happen to them if they erred. Fear is the greatest censor of them all. America innovates in technology because it's never been afraid to take risks and fail. Competition works, I love this line, and the hottest cauldron produces the strongest steel. The same is true of ideas, of creativity, and of literature. Freedom is the lifeblood of art. Okay, let's end on a positive note here. What do we do? I think it's the same thing with public schools. It is so beyond obvious that you can't send your kids there. If you do, you're just choosing to ignore the truth and the evidence of what's going on. And I think it's the same with news. And Barry Weiss, she made a point on this. She says, as these great institutions, used to be great, once great institutions like the New York Times and others, betray their standards and lose sight of their principles, she said, Americans still hunger for news that is accurate, opinions that are vital, and debate that is sincere. It's absolutely true. I think there's never been a market for the truth more than in times like this, which is why I'm glad you're here. And we'll do it again tomorrow. True story. Mike Slater. Have a good day.